So far we have seen different kinds of chains: single chain, sequential chain, math chain, RAG chain, router chain, LLM router chain, right? Now the next one is SQL chain, right? So let's go to our VS Code and see how we can implement this SQL chain, right? So this is our VS Code. Inside the chains demo, I'm trying to create a new Python file, and let's try to save this as SQL chain demo. And the first thing is, make sure you install LangChain OpenAI package. Once you install the package, the next thing is, let's try to load all the required modules. We are using OpenAI as our LLM, so we'll be chatting with that. So that's why we imported chat OpenAI from LangChain OpenAI and create SQL query chain. This is from LangChain Chains. So this is the chain that we will be using, and SQL database I will explain, right? Now the first thing is, let's try to load the environment variables from this .env file by using load_.env, right? And the next thing is, let's try to read the API key and store it inside API key variable. And now let's try to assign this API key to the OpenAI API key environment variable, right? So once we have the key, now the next step is, let's try to initialize our LLM by using this chat OpenAI, which is from LangChain OpenAI, right? And by using this SQL database, we have a sample database available for SQL Server, which is nothing but Chinook, right? So let's try to use this SQL database, which is from LangChain Community Utilities package. So we are using SQL database, and inside that we have a function called from URI, and we are passing the URI here, SQLite Chinook database, right? So we got our database, and now once we have our LLM and database, let's try to bind both the components by using this create SQL query chain from LangChain Chains. Okay, so for create SQL query chain, we are passing our LLM and the Chinook database, right? So inside the chain we have a function called invoke, and let's try to pass the question: how many employees are there, right? So we are asking a question. So this create SQL query chain will create an SQL query from this NLP text, right? How many employees are there? For this question, it will give us a SQL query, right? So let's try to print the response and see what we have inside the response, right? So let's try to run this code. So now you can see, select count of employee ID as number of employees from employees table, right? So it gave us a SQL query for this question: how many employees are there? Select count of this employee ID as number of employees from employees, right? So this is your SQL query. So once you get the SQL query, you try to create another chain, right? So first chain is, we got the SQL query. You create another chain and try to execute this SQL query, right? So now you get the idea. So instead of just the select, you can try to replace the prompt for delete or insert or update, right? And then accordingly it will create the SQL queries, and you can execute depending on your requirement, right? So what we have done here, we installed the required packages and we loaded the modules, we read the API key, and then we initialized our LLM, and then we got the Chinook database, which is a sample database available for SQL Server by using SQL database. Inside that we have the function called from URI, and we passed that URI and we got the database. And then the next thing is, we try to bind both LLM and database by using create SQL query chain, which is from LangChain Chains, and we got the chain. Inside that we have a function called invoke, and we passed the question, and by using this create SQL query chain we got our SQL query, right? So that is how you can use SQL chain. So far we have seen different kinds of chains from LangChain Chains package, right? And by now I hope you got a pretty good understanding on how to initialize your LLMs and create the prompt, and how to use different kinds of chains, right? So if you want to deep dive more, there are many other chains available and you can explore more depending on your requirement, right? So this is the official LangChain Chains documentation. All right, thank you.